No aviation expert on Earth could have predicted how 2020 would turn out for the industry. To say that the COVID-19 pandemic changed everything is an understatement. For a while, both airline and business aviation traffic ground to a halt as lockdowns kicked in around the world. Now, there are signs of recovery, but it's not consistent, and business aviation appears to be better placed for now than the airlines. FlightAware.com's wide array of data, based on tracking aircraft's ADS-B systems, helps the industry to make sense of what's happening.
I think one of the big things that we're excited to announce for the entire industry is that we actually saw net growth in business aviation over the holiday. So for example, if you look at July 3rd, which is the Friday before the holiday, we saw 28% more BA flights than the July 3rd before the last year. And so what we're seeing here is an increase in utilization of business aviation. Now, what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing real surges around holidays, around weekends, where we're seeing basically the same amount or an increase in the number of flights, but we're not seeing that same increase on weekdays. And so I think we're seeing leisure travel, particularly on the charter side, rebounding quite nicely, but your more traditional business flight operations still lag behind.
Some travelers with the financial means to do so appear to be trying what business and private aviation has to offer as an alternative to the airlines, either because they feel safer that way or because there isn't sufficient scheduled commercial service available.
I think that there's a combination of perceived safety for people using business and corporate aircraft. I think that also we've still seen a reduction in the number of flights. So there are routes that used to have nonstop service on the airlines that would now be connecting service, or routes that had multiple flights per day that may be down to one flight per day. So that's probably caused a surge in the demand for leisure travel. Although we are seeing a real rebound both in the last few weeks in both U.S. and Europe. I think that a lot of the airlines had really been running on a skeleton schedule, and they basically said July 1st we're going to get back to it. And by get back to it, we mean trying to get to maybe a 50% schedule or something like that. But that's a huge rise over the prior months.
Of course, the COVID outbreak hasn't hit all parts of the world at the same time, and the reaction of governments has resulted in varying degrees of effectiveness in resolving the crisis. This in turn has resulted in fluctuations in what's happened to aviation, and especially to airline traffic in different regions around the globe.
We never saw the same level of drop-off in the United States that we saw in Europe. And one of the reasons for that is because there aren't the same number of borders. Far more flights, both on the business aviation side and the airline side, are international, and there's a lot more complexity in those flight operations as a result. So Europe has been one of the hardest hit in terms of reduction of flights, both on the BA side and on the airline side, and one of the slowest to recover. We saw China as the first to recover, and that was really interesting a couple months ago because you could draw the graph and see the downturn in aviation in China that began in January and February, way before the rest of the world was taking action. And then we began to see that recovery as well. China, a lot like some very large countries like the U.S. and Australia that have a huge land mass that does a lot of domestic travel. And so countries like China and Australia and the U.S. can begin that domestic travel with a lot less complexity than Europe. So we saw Europe hit the hardest and the slowest to recover, but July 1st we've seen a big bump, and that's based on new airline schedules and new routes that are opening back up again. And so we're seeing that recovery in Europe, really for the first time we've seen more gains in the last 2 weeks than probably the last 2 months in Europe.
Some say COVID will change aviation forever, and possibly not in a good way. But that isn't the conclusion that the FlightAware team is drawing from its data.
I don't have any doubt that we're going to see a full recovery and that we're going to see growth. I think that a likely outcome, though, is that we're going to see a really strong recovery up to about 80% or so of flight volume, and then that last 20% is going to take a while, and then we'll see growth after that. But there's going to be a reduction in travel in the short term. There's particularly on the international side. There's also airlines taking the time to say, well, yes, maybe the airlines agree with me and they're going to see growth, but it's not quite what they had anticipated for the next few years, which is understandable, both due to the health concerns, due to recessions and the impact as a result. And so they're going to use this time to operate more efficiently, to not grow quite as aggressively. But let's go back and use China as a guide again, because China is a few months ahead of us as it relates to having to face this crisis. And so they're already back to down 25%, down 30%, when the rest of the world is 50% or more. And so I think if we can follow their lead like we've done in the past, we could expect that North America, for example, might be at minus 30% in a couple months. So they're really a leading indicator in this recovery. And I think that we need to just reset our expectations around the rate of growth and the rate of recovery. But if other parts of the world recover as quickly as China, we could be back to minus 20% by year end. And then I think we'll be at a full recovery at some point in late 2021, early 22.
In the meantime, there does appear to be an opportunity for business aviation to expand its customer base, as well as shifts in the sizes of jets that are now in demand. At the same time, perhaps unexpectedly, there also appears to be a surge in activity in the lighter end of the general aviation sector, with more people willing to fly themselves more often and over greater distances.
What we're seeing right now is charter is doing very well. The owner-operators of large aircraft that use them for personal travel are still traveling at the same or greater rate. What we're seeing the most impacted right now is the Part 91 flight departments. And so these are the organizations that own typically one or two aircraft, and they use them largely for business travel, for meetings, for visiting prospective sites, those sorts of things. We haven't seen the recovery there, both because there's not a lot of face-to-face meetings happening. There's not a lot of growth right now, and due to just general cost concerns and cost cutting. So I think that's going to be the last piece to recover. What's interesting, though, is shifting a little bit from business aviation to either general aviation or personal aviation, we're seeing a huge rise in piston aircraft flight activity. And we don't know quite what the reason is, but year over year, piston flight activity is up. It was the fastest to grow, and it probably some combination of people are maybe not traveling for vacations quite as much and are just using these airplanes as for sightseeing and for fun and for flight training. But at the same time, there's potential that more and more people are traveling with those aircraft. People that maybe own a single engine piston aircraft would traditionally do a family vacation on the airline and saying, you know what, this year let's just strap in and do that 1,000-mile flight in a couple legs in the airplane. There's also been some conversation around the demand for turbine aircraft. Largely, the most popular have been what they call the midsize and super midsize aircraft. And I think that what you could potentially be seeing is that there's sort of an element there of a lot of those aircraft have similar capability to some slightly smaller aircraft, but a lot more comfort. So we're talking stand-up cabin and galleys and fully operating labs and those sorts of things. Now, are we seeing a continued demand for the lower end of turbine aircraft? So whether that be single and twin engine turboprop aircraft or light aircraft, so your CJs and Phenoms and those sort of things that can achieve the mission, maybe not with the comfort and all of the amenities of the midsize and super midsize, but if the goal has shifted from a really comfortable, fully inclusive experience to I just want to get there and do it on a private turbine aircraft, then demand may shift as a result.
Thanks for watching this AIN video. Please like, subscribe, and share it if you've enjoyed it. Also, visit AINonline.com for all the latest on the aviation industry.